welcome to my video. Why don't we talk about facts today? Facts about the first two presidents of the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, Charles Taze Russell and Joseph Rutherford. Let me tell you why we are going to talk about that. Because we are going to mention some things here that you are not about to find in the publications, at least not in today's publications of Jehovah's Witnesses. And let me tell you why, when the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses is telling you to look for information only on their site, jw.org, is a big mistake, and you would be a fool if you just listen to them and do that only when it comes to finding out some information about, the history of the organization, for example. Let's say you want to buy a book on Amazon, for example. The first thing you are going to do is read some reviews from people who have purchased the book and read the book. Now, let's say that those reviews are written only by maybe the writer himself or herself and their close friends. Would the review have any value at all? Well, the answer is obvious. If we could write our own reviews about whatever we're selling out there, the reviews would be perfect. But that's not how it works, because we know that when you do your own reviews about anything, that review has no value, because obviously you're going to be biased about your own stuff. Well, that's what the Watchtower is telling you to do, right? They write only things that make them feel, look good, And then you are going to read only what they're writing, so you will never know the other side of the coin, right? You will only know what the Watchtower wants you to know. Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you some facts, some true facts that you can find, by Googling. But I'm going to put some links down below this video as well, if you want to check. Don't take my word for it. If you want to check if what I'm saying has any truth to it. All right. So those facts are going to be not as polished and good looking, good feeling, good sounding as the Watchtower organization. But that's what you need to know. You need to have a true review, not only a review of the owners of the product in this case, right? Like in the case of a book, for example. You need to have true reviews of people who are non-biased, who are just telling you the truth, the facts about, in this case, Charles Taze Russell and Joseph Rutherford. So here we go. So let's start with Charles Taze Russell, who was the first president of the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, the first president of the Watchtower organization. The first thing you need to remember, keep in mind, is that there is no proof whatsoever that Charles Taze Russell was any more anointed by God than any self-proclaimed prophet that came before and after him. It's quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. There are many proofs that he was a false prophet, like any other false prophets before and after him. As a matter of fact, a lot of articles that have been written about Charles Taze Russell call him the false prophet. Why do they call him the false prophet? Well, because within the books that he wrote, for example, studies in the scriptures, he wrote 6 volumes, and then the 7th volume was written after his death. Within the 6 volumes that he wrote, there are bunches of false prophecies. That is why actually the modern Watchtower Society does not like to talk about those too much, actually at all, because they are full of false prophecies. So while there is no proof that he was anointed by God and the chosen, faithful, and discreet slave by Jesus, there are plenty of proofs that he was a false prophet. So that is the first thing, besides everything else that Russell was, and I'm going to talk about. Besides that, the first and foremost and most important one is this: he was not a discreet and faithful slave chosen by Jesus. He was just a false prophet. Now, before you're telling me that the reason why the prophecies of Russell's were wrong, it's because it was old light, and now we have new light. Now think about it a second, just a second here. Why Jesus would pick a guy, anoint him as his discreet and faithful slave, and give him false information, false prophecies, false doctrines, and other BS in between. And then once the guy dies, decide, well, now let me give them the truth. This was a lie, but now let me send that next guy, that next anointed guy, let me give him the truth, or a little bit more truth. That is absolutely ridiculous. And if you believe that as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you are no more credible than any other ridiculous cult out there who believes outrageous stuff. Because believing that Jesus will actually pick someone, anoint that person and give him false information, is one of the most ridiculous things I ever heard. And once I find that out, there was no way I could, without laughing, remain as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So if you don't have any trouble with that, any problem with that, then you are just the same as any other ridiculous cult out there that you probably laugh about when you go in service, or any other religion for that matter. So just think about this just for a minute. Okay, now let's say that the fact that Russell was a false prophet, it's not enough of a proof to you that he wasn't chosen by God. Well, let me tell you, there are many other things, many other negative things, I should say, that Charles Taze Russell was. But I'm not going to mention them all here. You can do your own research. I'm going to put some links down below and you can go from there. But one thing I do want to mention in this video, it's that Russell was a philanderer. Yes, Charles Taze Russell was a womanizer. And by the way, if you don't believe me, go to the link down below. It's taken from a newspaper. It's called the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. And there is a question and answer, verbatim question and answer from court between the judge and his wife. Because she had taken him to court. She had sued him for adultery. She pretty much wanted him out, because she had plenty of proofs that he was an adulterer. And actually, his main mistress is mentioned in that article, in that question and answer article, and her name was Rose Ball. But on top of this main mistress, he had other affairs. Now, there are things that are not very clear in the Bible, I give you that. But adultery, what God thinks about adultery, that's very, very clear in the Bible. So there is no way on earth that this guy, even 100 years ago, even 200 years ago, could have been stumbled by not understanding what the Bible meant by adultery being a sin. So that begs for the next question, doesn't it? How in the world Jesus is going to pick a guy that, besides being a false prophet, is also an adulterer, a philanderer, a womanizer? There is no way on earth that Jesus would have done that. If you do truly believe the Bible as you say you do, if you truly base your religion on the Bible as you say you do, Jehovah's Witnesses, there is no way on earth you can also truly believe at the same time that Jesus were going to pick an adulterer, a philanderer, to be one of his representatives on earth. At the beginning of the video, if you remembered, I gave you an analogy. I was talking about you buying a book on Amazon, for example, and the last thing you want to do is just read reviews from the author himself or herself or their best friends. Because you want the review to be non-biased. You want the review to be true and trustworthy. Well, that's why as Jehovah's Witness, you should not read only information in the jw.org stuff. Because you are going to get, like the review written by its own author, you are going to get biased reviews, biased information. Never, never will you read in the Watchtower publications that Charles Taze Russell was an adulterer or a false prophet or a Freemason or a pyramidologist or a liar or a crook. But you will read all those in non-biased journalistic type articles. That is why you need to read other stuff. You need to shop around. You need to investigate your own religion, not only within the religion, but outside of the religion. So now let's see about the next president of the Watchtower, who was Joseph Rutherford. Now let's take the case of Joseph Rutherford here, who actually was, I think, I would say, a little worse than Charles Taze Russell, in the sense that not only was he also a womanizer, but was actually a mean person. He was not a kind Christian at all. And there are some testimonies, if you start searching, if you start reading around, there are some testimonies of witnesses that were around him that testified that he was a ruthless person, not someone you really wanted to have around. And he had, let's talk about this now, he had built a house in San Diego, California, called Bethlehem. This house was built with the money from the publishers and was built in 1929 nonetheless, during the Great Depression in the United States. So here's what it says here in Wikipedia about Bethlehem. Bethlehem is a 10-bedroom mansion in San Diego, California, constructed in 1929 in anticipation of various Old Testament biblical patriarchs or prophets, such as Abraham, Moses, David, Isaiah, and Samuel. It was maintained by the Watchtower Society, the parent organization used by Jehovah's Witnesses, and was also used as a winter home and executive office for the Watchtower president, Joseph Franklin Rutherford. The house was sold to a private owner in 1948. So you see, Rutherford built this house supposedly to greet Abraham, Moses, David, Isaac, and you name it, those old patriarchs in the Old Testament that were supposed to resurrect in 1925. And here again, the second paragraph in Wikipedia says, in 1918, Watchtower publication began predicting, under the direction of Rutherford, that Old Testament patriarchs or princes would be resurrected back to earthly life in 1925. It was thought that these princes would become Earth's new leaders and that their resurrection would be a prelude to the inauguration of a new earthly society and the abolition of death. It had previously been thought that these individuals will be raised shortly after 1914. Well, it didn't happen because we know how many, and maybe you don't know if you are a brand new Jehovah's Witness, but look into it, do your research about your own religion. There are many predictions, many prophecies that were made by the Watchtower that never happened. Okay? And that's why here it says in parentheses that those guys, first of all, it had been said that they will be raised from the dead shortly after 1914. Didn't happen, so then the next date was 1925. And then the paragraph goes on, these princes would use Jerusalem as their capital, of some of the princes being located in other principal parts of the earth. Despite the failure of this prediction, Rutherford continued to preach their imminent return. Of course he did, because it was very useful for him to pretend that, no matter how many mistakes they made before, those patriarchs were still going to come back to earth, so he could live in this house, in this luxury house with 10 bedrooms, waiting for those guys, for those biblical patriarchs to come back to earth. So another interesting thing, think about it. How in the world Jesus is going to anoint and take as his faithful and district slave a racist womanizer, a ruthless womanizer, and a liar who keeps on predicting things that never happened? How in the world, ask yourself this question for God's sake, how in the world is Jesus going to pick these two men to represent him on earth? You have to ask yourself this question. Now let's talk about Rutherford's personality here for a minute. And by the way, you can do your own research. Just Google Rutherford personality, Rutherford character. You'll find plenty of articles. By the way, those articles are not written by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who have any type of agenda against Jehovah's Witnesses. They are just articles written in a journalistic way, like any other article about any other personality on earth. So here is what it says in, I'm going to read what I have highlighted here, first couple of sentences. Rutherford was an extremely forceful, self-seeking character. By legal tricks and maneuvers, he was able to avoid the will's intent and directives to establish himself as president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, contrary to the wishes of the majority of the board of directors. Judge Joseph Franklin Rutherford usurped total control of the society and became an absolute dictator. So, here, my friend, you must ask yourself a couple of questions. First of all, by the way, he called himself judge just because he filled in one day for a judge. He was never a judge. So first of all, giving himself such a title when he doesn't even legally own this title really shows what type of person he was. Secondly, as it says here in this couple lines, he used legal tricks because he used to be a lawyer. So as a lawyer, he knew the law. He used legal tricks to maneuver himself to the top of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, to put himself as president of that organization. So you must put yourself in the shoes of Jesus here. Do you think that Jesus would have chosen among all the men that were living on earth at the time, he would have chosen a guy who used to be a drunkard, a womanizer, and a very presumptuous, ruthless person to represent him as one of his faithful, anointed Christian? Do you think Jesus would have chose such a person to represent himself on earth? There is no way on earth that if you are truly honest, you would answer that Jesus would have chosen such a person. I don't know how you want to make that up, how you want to embellish that. There is no way on earth that you could truthfully, honestly answer that Jesus Christ would have chosen such a person to represent him on earth. Now, why this is so difficult for most Jehovah's Witnesses to consider? It's because if both Charles Taze Russell and Joseph Rutherford were never appointed by Jesus Christ as faithful and discreet slave, were just fake representative of Jesus, like any other fake representative of Jesus, the very organization of Jehovah's Witnesses would just fall apart. And that's why it's very, very difficult when you are pretty much indoctrinated to even consider that you have wasted your whole life, or half your life, or a quarter of your life, or even 10 years of your life like I have. It's hard to consider that you wasted all this time and energy and yourself into a fake religion, into a religion that you used to believe or want to believe that is the only true religion, when it's just a cult that is made up by very, very, very imperfect men that were never, ever, ever appointed by Jesus. So now you probably understand, though, that is why so many Jehovah's Witnesses left the organization like I have. Because once we know and accept the fact that we were fooled, no matter how many years we were fooled, when we accept the fact that this is all built on a lie, there is no way on earth that we can stay in this religion. So hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it if you liked it. Comment, give me your thoughts, share it, and subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. See you next time on the next video. Bye bye.